are required in those areas. So as an authority, because we are a regulator, we must ensure that they follow the regulations dealing with establishment of a facility. If you look at, for example, textile industries, and globally, they contribute 8% greenhouse gas emissions. And this is expected to increase by the year 2030 to 50%. So it's important that whatever facility is being put up must be subjected to environment and social impact assessment to ensure we safeguard the environment.
And just before I bring Mr. Lange, the Deputy Director from NEMA, I'd like to hear, what Ms. Patricia has to say about your sentiments, Mr. Mamo, because Patricia, with, fibre is contributing, food fibre is contributing to climate change with around a quarter of greenhouses gas, coming from agriculture, forest and other land use. So, clothing and footwear production causes about 8% of this.
That's very true, Brenda. The fashion industry and production of food is causing a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. Actually, there was a review of the greenhouse gas inventory in Kenya, and we found that the agricultural sector, together with the land use change, is the largest contributor of greenhouse gases within the country. And that's very true. I would like to focus mainly on fast fashion, and this is because a lot of water is used to make just, for example, one cotton shirt. And it takes a long time for also this type of fiber to degrade. So it remains in the landfills, and they also produce about 10% of the world's emission. So there are things that can be done to combat this. For example, if we reduce consumerism in terms of not buying things just because they're in fashion, this contributes towards reducing greenhouse gas emission. And this is something that can be done on a very individual basis. There are things that people can be able to do as opposed to waiting for large industries or the government to spearhead change. In our own individual capacities, there's a lot we can do. For example, make sure that what we consume is grown ethically and sustainably. Reducing food waste, there's a lot of food waste, and this contributes greatly to greenhouse gas emissions and climate change in turn. So on an individual basis, there's a lot that we can be able to do. Stop buying a lot of clothes, repair whatever we can and reuse, donate what clothes that we are no longer using, use handkerchiefs instead of disposable tissues. There is a lot that on an individual basis we can be able to do, and I would advocate for that.
So if you follow what you're advocating for, if Kenyans do follow that, then it means that we could actually reduce this gas emission and environment pollution by about 50% by 2030.
Yes, we will be reducing our carbon footprint, and it will go a long way towards reducing greenhouse gas emissions for the country and also globally.
All right, so Mr. Lange, as NEMA, Ms. Patricia has brought a very important point in terms of what we're talking about, the gas emission and the sort of environmental pollution that we see every day during production. So when a production company is being opened, what measures do NEMA put in place or tell the owners of the company, this is what you need to do, this is how you need to do your waste disposal, this, in case you do your waste disposal wrongly, this is what we are going to do?
Thank you, Brenda. And I think for us as an authority in charge of matters environment, my Director General just said that before any company comes to operation, there's what we call environmental social impact assessments, which in itself contains a comprehensive environmental management plan for that industrial facility with mitigation measures that they're required to adhere to. So when a company does properly the environmental and social impact assessment, and then there is that environmental management plan, then they are given what it is that they need to take to ensure that they can manage all the pollution and greenhouse gases that are likely to be associated with the company operations. And in addition to that, then there is what we call audits that go annually when the company is on operation. So they end up taking up audits and try to see whether what was envisaged in the beginning is operational, is working. And if it's not working, what is it that can be done to ensure that then they continue to comply and ensure that the greenhouse gases and pollution does not happen for our country. And NEMA, I think we are all the time willing to work very closely with the companies to ensure that whatever challenges they face, then we can come together as stakeholders and address those challenges together so that we can provide Kenyans a clean and healthy environment and avoid the greenhouse gases that we are saying they are responsible for global warming and eventual climate change, and then bring what we are here for today, desertification, because once the climate change is increased, then we can imagine what will happen. Then the desert may start become more severe and more serious. Thank you.
But then, Mr. Lange, we've seen NEMA close some companies. Just before I bring in, Mr. Macharia, we've seen NEMA close some companies or production companies, factories, because of flouting the environmental regulations that have been put in place. And at times you see the companies again being opened. Is it that they're not committed towards ensuring a safe environment? And they only become committed once NEMA has taken action?
I want to say that most of our industries are really committed and seriously committed to ensure that they adhere to the provided environmental guidelines and regulations. But often than not, I think a few elements end up maybe ignoring the guidelines. And so just as an authority, we have a duty to serve Kenyans. And so when we realize that under repeated alerts, repeated reminders that please, something is happening, please try to do something, then they don't do, then I think we still have the duty as a public entity to try and ensure that we invoke the provisions of the law so that at least those who do not want, those elements that do not want to do things promptly, then they are prompted to do that. And often we have had a good engagements, even after some action has been taken, where then they come back and then we work together very closely, and then we see then improvement significantly, and eventually then we see matters environment being taken care of. So we want to say, really, this is part of what we are entitled to do, and we have been doing it very cooperatively with the industries. Thank you.
So, all right, Mr. Mamo, you want to say something before I rope in Mr. Macharia?
Just to add on Charles, I think we normally follow as an authority a compliance protocol. Before we close a facility, we give them an improvement order. If the improvement order does not work, we give them a restoration order. We even have a negotiated compliance. If all this does not work, then we shut down a facility. And after we shut down, before we open, they need to show that they are ready to comply. So they develop what we call a compliance plan with timelines and ensure that NEMA monitors those timelines. Thank you.
So, Mr. Macharia, does it mean that with urbanization, many of us have become distant from, from land because the food, fiber, and feed are essential to our daily lives, and of course, most of them are originated from the ground?
Well, this aspect of urbanization, we need to appreciate also what science research is informing us about trends in urbanization, in the sense that scientific evidence shows that as in the coming years, we will have more and more people moving away from the rural areas to urban areas, and so that's the trend. Of course, Kenya, we have this challenge of having, the counties have just come and there is now a lot of growth, urbanization in the counties. And so it appears like the urbanization is creeping in very quickly. But scientifically, the trends are that we should have fewer and fewer people in the rural areas and more in urban areas. And in that respect, therefore, we need to plan for these urban areas, wherever they are, because they will grow, they will grow in size. And you see an urban area, wherever it is, even in those rural areas, it needs facility. It will produce like waste, discharge wastewater, and these are some of the challenges which will impact negatively in these dry areas. For example, if you take, for example, Nairobi, River Nairobi is polluted, and that water may not be available for some section of Nairobi. If we allow the same to happen in our rural areas, that the rivers get polluted, then you see our people there will face challenges because the water is not available. And at the same time, it also impacts on the surrounding environment such that it will get degraded very quickly. And so we need to, the issue of urbanization and desertification and drought, therefore, they go hand in hand. We need to plan for urbanization to address also issues of desertification and drought. Because whenever urbanization comes in, then there is demand for resources from the neighboring rural area. So we need a lot of fiber, we need food to be supplied from there. And so we need to check what kind of farming, what kind of afforestation is happening there, what kind of resources are harvested, so that we do not have this urbanization that is growing very quickly, and research shows that urbanization will increase. We don't want it to cause negative impacts on our land.
All right, so Ms. Patricia, that means in every consumer, if every consumer was actually to buy products that do not degrade the land, suppliers would, will cut back on the flow of these products and send a powerful signal to producers and the policymakers.
Exactly. So if we make efficient use of what we can be able to obtain sustainably, then we reduce waste. And if we reduce waste, then we also push for reduction of excess production. And one of the things that can be able to support or push industries to be able to reduce production is consumer push. As much as the government can do their part, the consumers also play a very important role in pushing for change within the industries. And like my colleague just mentioned, urbanization presents many challenges, especially nowadays we have farmers who farm on the urban fringe, just on the fringes of urban regions. And so there are positives and there are negatives. And something that I found quite interesting is that as urban areas continue to increase, we have more demand for food, high-value foods from farmers, for example, in terms of vegetables. And so farmers can be able to take advantage of this, but they can do so sustainably, which leads to positive socioeconomic impacts without necessarily degrading the environment. I had also wanted to mention that urbanization or land use change, we have seen impacts already in Kenya. Like the past few rainfall seasons, we've seen landslides occurring in northwestern parts of the country, which was not very common. And if we can recall, most of this was caused because most of the people in those regions changed the land from forested regions to grow mainly onions. And so their land has there's nothing holding the land, the ground together. And therefore we are already seeing disastrous impacts. And as this continues, we are looking at more drought conditions and more desertification. So a concerted effort from every aspect, from the government, from the consumers, and from individual people is very important in ensuring that we maintain environmental integrity.
All right, and Mr. Mamo, let me just read a message that was sent out by the UNCCD, that is the United Nations Conservation Executive Secretary for Desertification and Drought for 2020. And this is what he had to say. And it's something that Ms. Patricia has touched on. And it says that the food we lose or waste every year uses 1.4 billion hectares. By wasting food, we need we indeed waste land and water. We waste our biological resources. We emit carbons. We jeopardize the future of new generations. In most cases, how much food we waste is entirely our choice. The land used to graze and produce grains to feed animals makes up 80% of agricultural land, but you can choose a more balanced diet. And the reason as to why I'm reading that, Mr. Mamo, is just to pose this question to you. Have you sat down with industrial players? And when I talk about industrial players, is the people who own these industries, trying to give them a solution. Instead of using this to produce your product, you can go in a digital way, or you can use this, or we can introduce something else so as to ensure that environment is safe.
Thank you, Brenda. I think the challenge we have is, as I said, is mass production, mass consumption, and a lot of waste that is being produced. And if you look at the waste in our major towns like Nairobi, possibly 60% of this is organic waste. And it all ends up in our dump sites, causing greenhouse gases like methane. But if the same can be utilized, because we are thinking currently of circular economy, where we will drive value from the waste. If the same can be transformed into, for example, like organic fertilizer, then we'll be able to reduce climate change by reducing a lot of waste going into our landfills and dump sites. It's important that the industries realize this and drive value out of this waste instead of just dumping this into our landfills.
All right, and from your statement, I'd like us to listen to what Ms. Anne Jepa had to say. She is the director at the UNDP Global Policy Center on Resilience Ecosystems and Desertification.
Desertification and Drought Day is dedicated to the theme of food, feed, and fiber. Now, we know that plants and animals provide most of our food, clothing, and footwear. And therefore, Desertification and Drought Day this year seeks to highlight how much of what people eat and wear comes from food and fiber, which in turn comes from land. This, of course, is very important, particularly since it means that food, animal feed, and fiber for clothing all compete for productive land. And demand is growing due to population growth. As you know, we are expected to be 10 billion people in 2050. So allow me to share with you a couple of facts to illustrate how important this really is as an issue for us today. It means that an extra 593 million hectares of agricultural land, which is an area nearly twice the size of India, will be required over 2010 levels by 2050 in order to produce enough food to feed 10 billion people on the planet. 1/3 of all food produced each year, however, is lost or wasted, while close to 1 billion people are undernourished. So this loss or waste of food corresponds to a land footprint of about 1.4 billion hectares, or close to 30% of the world's agricultural land area, which is a surface area larger than Canada and India combined.
So, Mr. Lange, you've heard what Ms. Anne has talked about, but my question is just to, so you can respond to my question based on what she said. What can we do to have enough land to meet the demand? Because this demand seems to be arising from urbanization,
Thank you, Brenda. I think, yes, indeed, I appreciate this is a great challenge, not only for Kenya, but for the global community, because as you've heard the statistics, we are staring at 10 billion people by 2050. And we have the duty, and governments have the duty to feed these people. So as you asked, what is it that we can do? I think my best take on this is that we need seriously to invest in technology, because the land it cannot be expanded any further. We know what land is available in countries, we know what land is available globally. And so what we need to invest is to ensure every improved production per hectare, so that we can feed more people per hectare than we do currently. And I can say that thanks to scientists, because there's a lot of science going on in terms of how much we can improve in terms of production of food, feed, and fiber per hectare. And I just talked in my previous talk that there is already what we are calling conservation agriculture, there is smart agriculture, which is proving that by adopting technology science, then you can increase several times the amount that is currently being produced under traditional subsistence farming. So I think the choice we have is to accelerate, and for instance for our country, is to increase support to science and technology, so that the scientists can bring technology and new breeds that can produce more per hectare of land. Because if you look throughout the country, I think even the people, people in the countrysides, their land is also shrinking further. So we need to give these farmers better breeds that can produce more for their children and for their families. So my take on this, as we celebrate this day on Desertification and Drought Day, is to call upon development partners, government, to invest more on science and technology that can bring for us breeds and technologies that can help farmers produce more in the small lands that we have and avoid or save the natural ecosystem, so that we can avoid this desertification and drought eating us severely.
But Mr. Lange, how can we talk about, technology and trying to save the land when it comes to urbanization and housing? And that is something that NEMA has been focusing on very, very much. Because here we have urbanization, here we have land that we need to conserve so as to fight desertification and drought.
I think as an authority, we have been doing what we can in collaboration with partners to try and see that we try to bring these technologies on board. For instance, currently how the use of GIS, there is an opportunity, and that is provided for even for the government, to develop special plans to try and see what is it that is remaining to be arable land, what is it that can be tapped as urban areas, and what is it that can be left as the natural ecosystems. And so what I am bringing in here is that through that, because for us an authority under the law that establishes the authority, we have what we call also county environmental action plan, we have national environmental action plans, we have very seriously working with the stakeholders, detailed some of the things that we can do to ensure that while going forward, the county governments, national government, in collaboration with stakeholders, we can appropriately guide our people on how is it that they can invoke the technologies to ensure that then we save as much as possible of our natural ecosystem, so that, because I think some of, as my colleagues have said, this natural ecosystem is the one that serves as a carbon sink. The greenhouse gases that we have been talking about, this is what will save us from the catastrophes of global warming, because they will now capture the greenhouse gases and then tame climate change and the desertification. Thank you.
So, Mr. Mbama, with the changes in consumer and the corporate behavior, because you deal a lot, you interact more with the corporate sector, and the adoption of more efficient planning and sustainable practice, then this means we could have enough land that could meet the demand.
Thank you, Brenda. I think we can also utilize additionally, like for example, we have 80% of ASAL lands. The same could be put under irrigation. Remember, during heavy rains, we have lots and lots of floods. and most of this water just end up in our sea. I think the best thing that we can do is to build those huge water reservoirs and put up this vast land under irrigation. Smart agriculture is what we currently talk about. So it's to ensure that we put the right technology in place and have good food production using the latest technology. Like for example, in Israel, they use the technology to produce citrus fruits, and which they sell globally. We can have the same technology around and ensure that that vast land is put into proper use through conservation agriculture.
All right. And Ms. Patricia, I'd like us to, let me just read a statement, that by the governor of Marsabit County, that is Honorable Mohamud. And he says, let me just get it. He says that whereas Marsabit County is endowed with rich natural resources and has been running a successful livestock keeping, because livestock is also contributing to this desertification and drought, the impacts emerging environmental changes globally have reached Marsabit County, and this is the most important thing that he's saying, and are affecting many sectors of that county. So, for instance, Marsabit has been severely impacted by adverse environmental conditions that has led previously to pastoralists losing many heads of livestock, loss of biodiversity, environment degradation. And it paints a picture that Marsabit County, being one of the counties that falls under the arid and semi-arid areas, it's actually feeling the adverse effects of desertification and drought.
Yes, that is true. As we move forward into the future, we are already seeing the impacts of climate change on various parts of the country. And as has been mentioned by my colleagues, the hardest hit areas are those that already exist under arid and semi-arid lands. Well, our role as the Kenya Meteorological Department is to provide information that can be able to support decision-making and planning. And so we provide information for long-term planning, and most counties are able to incorporate this information into their county integrated development plans. And most of them, actually, it's a requirement for them to include climate change information in how they plan. So we provide information on a county basis of how the climate is expected to change in the next 20 years, next 50, and up to 100 years towards the end of the century. And so counties using this information can be able to plan for different pathways in order to adapt to the changing climate, and also to put in place measures to mitigate further production of greenhouse gases.
So, Mr. Macharia, when you work with the county governments when it comes to planting trees, and especially counties that are within the arid and the semi-arid areas, what do you actually look out for?
The ministry, what we have done is, as I said, we now have a strategy. And a strategy integrates what should happen at the counties, because that is where the land is. And this ministry, what we do is, number one, we have the seed development center, the institution that collects seeds and provides quality seeds, so that we have quality tree seedlings. And that is the Kenya Forest Research Institute. So that is our prime institution that is providing seeds to the counties, and also helping communities also to correct their seeds and do it in a way that enhances quality of the trees that are grown there. And then secondly, we have the Kenya Forest Service, which is another institution of this ministry. And Kenya Forest Service is in charge of helping the counties in tree growing, like managing of the tree nurseries, making sure that the right species are planted at the right place, and then making sure that there is a good networking between all the stakeholders, so that there is coordinated approach to growing trees in the counties. And of course, you are also aware that every county has the same arrangement like the national government. And so we have the departments in charge of forestry in the counties. And these are very instrumental. They are our link departments with the national government when we are addressing this aspect of tree growing.
And Mr. Mamo, let's narrow this conversation down to the counties, at the county level. Before a company or an individual wants to open up a factory, especially within the arid and semi-arid areas, what do you look out for in terms of telling this person this place doesn't have it doesn't have enough trees? So for you to, if you have to set up your company here, it means several trees have to go. Have you reached that point where you have actually told some investors within this arid and semi-arid, counties that are within the arid and semi-arid areas that, you know what, you cannot set up this company here because we fear degradation is going to take place and this will actually affect rainfall within this area and also will affect food production?
Breda, it all depends on the type of industry or the facility that a project proponent wants to set up. If it's an industry that requires massive use of the local resources like water, forest resource, and others, then as NEMA we normally guide the project proponent after he presents what we call terms of reference for his project when undertaking the environment and social impact assessment. But an investor normally comes and talks to NEMA and see what can be done in terms of the type of the facility that he wants to put up. But if you look at a number of counties, the resource base, the natural resource base is quite low, especially in arid and semi-arid lands. So it all depends on the project. Like for example, when an investor wants to put up a borehole for the communities, as NEMA we normally advise, like for example, if a borehole is in a community range area, an area that communities normally use for pasture, then we advise that the borehole should be such a distance from other water sources to avoid localized degradations in those areas. It all depends on the type of the project that an investor wants to put up.
So, Mr. Lange, allow me to ask you this. So how many companies probably have you closed within the arid and the semi-arid counties because of the impact that the companies will have on the environment? And this I mean with the arid and semi-arid areas, counties that fall within that area.
Brenda, I think for now, I don't think we have any. But of course, we have a compliance and enforcement department at NEMA, where our data is always open, and anybody who wants to gather specific information, then we welcome them to come to this department to come and verify in the previous times, or what could have happened in the engagement with these facilities. But as for now, I think in my previous talk, I said that over the years we have seen a lot of improvement in terms of compliance with the law, in terms of what the companies are required to do. And so I think one thing I want to say and appreciate is for facilities in complying with the provisions of the law. And we want to continue urging them to work very closely with NEMA, because we are a public entity and we are there to work closely with stakeholders so that we can provide Kenyans with a clean and healthy environment and comply with the provisions of the law. So thank you very much.
So, Ms. Patricia, what role can I play, as an individual, as a Kenyan, in terms of ensuring that we fight, issues of desertification and drought becomes a thing of the past, just apart from, what you had mentioned, looking at, do I really need to wear this cloth in terms of fiber, because the theme for this is food, feed, and fiber?
there is a lot that on an individual level we can be able to do. And my favorite thing to really talk about is water wastage within our own homes. Like, how do we use water in our houses? Do we, while washing dishes, do we just let water run? While brushing our teeth, do we just let water run? That is something that may look quite insignificant, but if every single person does it, then it leads towards a reduction of water wastage. Something else that we can be able to do is make sure that we consume everything that we buy, and therefore we end up not wasting. For example, food. If we buy only what we need, then the tendency to waste food is greatly reduced. And even in terms of clothes, as I had mentioned earlier, if we cannot continue using, we can donate them, or even thrift shop, which saves us coins and also saves the environment. We can also grow our own vegetables for those who live in regions where they can be able to have a small kitchen garden. That is quite useful. And even by being, as consumers, we can push for the places where we shop to produce food more sustainably, and therefore we can be able to play a small part in combating climate change and hence desertification, which is a direct impact of climate change.
And talking about my role and your role to play when it comes to fighting desertification and drought in the country, I'd like us to listen to what Mr. Frank had to say. He is the chairman at the Saswatch Kenya board.
The entry point for Saswatch in this program is to ensure that the societies are implementing their own initiatives. It's not self-driven or something. So that we can be able to link them to other development partners. We had been working with a UNDP country office to support community initiatives in many parts of this country, in Kwale, in Nyanza, in northern Kenya, and so on. And this is where the communities, because the communities are many in the drought, and they are the ones who are really impacted by effect of drought and desertification, and therefore their initiatives need to be supported so that they can be able to mitigate the effect of drought and desertification. And therefore Saswatch had been working in these areas in all parts of this country, which is carries about over 80% of the country, and that's where a lot of livestock are, and there are a lot of other resources. And these communities had been living in this area. They need to be supported so that they can be able to carry out their own survival.
All right, so allow me and my guests to take a short breather here on KTN News, but we shall be right back. But I understand we're not taking a short commercial break, so let me go straight to Mr. Macharia from the Ministry of Environment. And you've heard what, Mr. Frank Msafiri has said, that everyone has a role to play in ensuring that we conserve our environment, and especially the forest. Which begs the question, Mr. Macharia, when you're talking about conserving our forest as a way of trying to fight desertification in our country, many people, especially low-income earners, have been using firewood, or charcoal in short, as a source of fire. And that is something that the government has been fighting, and people are now turning to using the gas. And what is another alternative that the Ministry of Environment, the government in short, can give to Kenyans who cannot even afford to buy a 13 kg or 6 kg of gas as a source of fire, as a way, of trying to conserve the environment?
Okay. When we talk about conserving our forest, for example, it means wise use of resources that come from a forest. And the forest has so many uses, and some of them are, if we were able to extract resources from forests that are equal to the recovery rate of the same forest, so that we don't degrade it, then we will not be having a problem. But now we have this challenge of people extracting more. And that is why one of the main uses is firewood or charcoal. And the energy sector is a major player in terms of degradation of our arid areas. And what we have recommended is we need to promote and use alternatives to firewood. And you have mentioned one, that is the gas. And of course, gas is, there are two types, depending on where one is. You could buy the one that is sold in cylinders, or one may generate your own cooking gas at home through generation of methane, what we call biogas. Incidentally, not many people have invested in this area of developing biogas in the rural areas. And what the ministry has done is we are recommending, we have come up with some radical shifts in waste management in this country. And this applies to urban areas and rural areas at the same time, whereby we are moving away from linear waste management to circular waste management. Circular means that you don't just generate waste and then dispose and then it goes to the dump site, but rather you extract maximum value from waste. And this is expected to address the issue of degradation, because now the waste that we have in the house, we will sort it out, and we have 60% which is organic, which can be converted using appropriate technology into biogas, which we can use for cooking and for lighting our houses. And since every homestead generates organic waste, we expect that if these technologies are promoted and adopted by communities, then we can reduce pressure on our forests. We can reduce pressure on our plant biomass. And the same goes with the making of briquettes. Instead of charcoal, we make briquettes using the materials that we are throwing away at home. And this way we will benefit from not having a dirty environment, but also recovering the materials and using them, extracting more value from them. And then we have solar. We have a lot of solar energy in the country, and we can use it for cooking, we can use it for lighting. And if we adopt both biogas and solar, then we will be in a position to reduce pressure on our forests.
All right, Mr. Macharia, thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me just take a short commercial break as we take a short breather, but we're right back with this discussion when it comes to desertification and drought. Food, fiber, feed. That is the theme for this year's, desertification and drought 2020. So I see you in a short while.